Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new episode of Chatting with Lady C. Hello, Mum, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, honey. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Do you like our change of spot?
Yeah, it's nice. It's a bit different.
It's good, isn't
Changes the
it?
setup.
Yeah. And one or two people asked about the Christ head in the background. Oh, I forget who asked what.
That would have been on the London video.
Yeah.
Well, it's here now.
Yes, it is. It is. It's transferred from London to here. It is by David Boxer, who was my brother's best friend from childhood. In fact, when my brother died, he left David his piano. David was Jamaica's most eminent artist, and he died about 2 years ago, rather sadly, very young. Not as young as Uncle Mickey, but still young. He was a great guy. He and my brother were great friends, and I inherited that from my brother. It's called the Christ head, which is what Uncle Mickey always called it.
Mm-hmm.
So he must have got that from David. But I noticed when we took it down, to bring it down here, that on the back it says the disciple in pencil. I don't know who wrote that. It would have been exhibited at some point. So maybe it was the art gallery that wrote it. But I will go by Uncle Mickey's description because that's what he always called it, and he must have got it from David. And you rightly made the point about the crown of thorns in the picture, which does suggest it's got to be the Christ head. So, first question.
Right, I'm just going to say also, if you haven't gone onto Instagram yet, we're just doing the raffle contest still. It's going on till the 18th of January, so if you haven't heard about it, go on Mum's Instagram and have a look if you want to have a play and win a signed t-shirt from Mum. Alright, so let's go start the first questions today.
Okay.
So for our first question is from Adam Stewart. Lady C, can I ask you a question about royal servants overstepping the mark, please? I noticed in The Crown, the Prince of Wales had a manservant. He spoke to Diana in a dreadful way. Did this type of thing really happen? You mentioned earlier Paul Burrell forgot his place and inflicted himself on Diana. The Duchess of York had a similar person called Jane Andrews. Did you ever meet her? In the end, she murdered her boyfriend.
Hot, my gosh, hot question. Servants do sometimes overstep the mark. Nancy Astor had one that was tremendously rude to her. My stepmother-in-law, Margaret Argyle, had one, Springett, who could be extraordinarily rude to her, especially when Springett had been hitting the whiskey bottle. But by and large, servants are not rude. But they sometimes do overstep the mark, which is why Diana was getting rid of Paul Burrell, because she felt that he had interposed himself too much everywhere. Jane Andrews, I do not recall Jane Andrews ever overstepping the mark with Sarah York, actually. I did meet Jane Andrews on more than one occasion. I met her, the last time I met her was at a ball at the Grosvenor House. In those days, she was going out with Dimitri Horn, whose mother, Chrysanthe Lemos, was a friend of mine. Still is, actually. We used to sit on charity committees together. And Dimitri was the son of her first marriage. And Dimitri was going out with Jane Andrews. And I went over to the table to talk to Dimitri, and they had recently started to go out. and he introduced me to her. She seemed perfectly pleasant and all the rest of it. Oh, terrible what she did. Terrible what she did. You know, she murdered her next boyfriend. I mean, Dimitri once said to me afterwards, he said, I had a lucky escape, didn't I? Which I think he did, because, I mean, she was seriously disturbed.
Yeah, but maybe Dimitri didn't disturb her as much as the second boyfriend.
Well, the second boyfriend disturbed her because he wouldn't marry her. But Dimitri, I don't think, would have married her either. Because I can't imagine Chrysanthi, his mother, or Geoffrey, his father, being rather keen on him marrying a former servant. I don't mean to sound snobbish, but, you know, she was a dresser. She wasn't of the background where she was a member of the royal household. She was a member of the royal staff, and there's a big difference. So she was very ambitious, and she moved up in the world, and good for her, and I'm not decrying that, and she certainly seemed perfectly pleasant and agreeable when I met her. But beyond that, I don't know, and I really wouldn't want to know either, because I don't want to get involved with people like that, especially with people who literally have blood on their hands. So, next question, honey.
No worries. So for our next question today is from Brenda Griffin. Happy New Year, Lady C and Misha. Enjoying your videos. They are so informative. Just a hypothetical question. Do you think Princess Anne would have made a good queen? I do. She is a very hard-working and down-to-earth. A very underestimated royal, in my opinion. No drama when she was nearly kidnapped. Compare Anne to Meghan or Harry, no comparison.
Certainly no comparison. Princess Anne is very matter-of-fact, as she said the other day about Harry and Meghan was her implication, but I don't think it might have been totally them. Some of the younger ones seem to think that they have reinvented the wheel. And, you know, the wheel has been invented. Everybody rides around on things with wheels, and she's not claiming credit for these new discoveries called wheels. Well, of course, some of the others, especially Harry and Meghan, say, wow, look at this. I've discovered the wheel. Look at the wheel. Look at the wheel. Am I not clever? When she was kidnapped, when they tried to kidnap her, because she actually wasn't kidnapped, she refused to cooperate, refused to get out of the car. You know, stood her ground very firmly and just wasn't taking any nonsense. I think she'd have made an exemplary queen. I think she'd have made a wonderful queen. I have to say, she has been very measured. She has brilliantly executed her role of Princess Royal. She is one of the most hard-working royals who ever lived. She does not, she's not as inventive as, say, the Prince of Wales, you know, but then their positions are different. The Prince of Wales, being the heir to the throne, was able to invent and the Prince's Trust and do a great deal of good through the Prince's Trust. Princess Anne has had to go down a rather more travelled route, let's put it that way. She's had to do more usual charities, but she's not a show-off. For instance, when she was doing Save the Children, she took time to familiarise herself to know what the charity was about, what the causes involved, what the country's involved how they interacted with Britain, etc., before she gave an opinion. She's not like Meghan. She doesn't get a briefing paper, read it for 5 minutes and decide she's an expert. She will take months or years of studying something before she feels that she is actually an expert. And when she feels she's an expert, you can bank on it, she is an expert. I've met her a few times. She's rather dry, very perfunctory. I mean, we have friends and friends of friends in common, and I get nothing but good reports about her. She and I were never ever going to be best friends because we're just not that similar as personalities. But when I've met her, I've found her perfectly correct and perfectly charming. And I will say, when she was young, full face, she was rather attractive. She's become more stately as she's got older. She's become like very much actually in the tradition of the previous Princess Royal, who was the Queen's Aunt Mary, who was quite plain. Princess Anne has a great figure. She's never gained any weight. She still wears clothes she wore 40 and 50 years ago, and you can tell because she recycles them. Oh, really? That's an accomplishment, because I certainly can't wear what I wore 50 years ago. And she is a very nice person, very down-to-earth. People who are great friends of hers say there's no side to her. She is what she is. And she's not pretentious. She's truly authentic. And I think she would have made a very good queen. But that is not to take away from the fact that the Prince of Wales has done a tremendous amount of good through the Prince's Trust and some of his initiatives while being Prince of Wales. I don't think, because some people would like to think that she would have been a better queen than he would have been a king. Well, their positions were different and their roles have been different. And she has gone down the more expected route of patronages, hundreds of patronages. I mean, she works like a slave. While the Prince of Wales has been more innovative, but then his position was always, as heir to the throne, going to be more influential than hers. And so she was always going to be more hamstrung, but she shows what it's like to be a spare and happy to do the work. She is a true servant of the people. She's a wonderful woman and very much to be admired. What do you think?
Yes, I think that she's, like you say, the spare, but she loves doing what she does, and she puts herself out there with no problem, and she doesn't complain about it. So
that's right. And she doesn't mind being number 2, 3, or 4. You know, she's doing what she's doing, and she does it well. And with her, the virtue is its own reward. And I think she is an absolute foil to Meghan and Harry, and she shows them up just by being what she is. She shows them up for the shallow, well, she shows them up. Let's leave it at that.
No worries.
Next question, honey.
So for our next question today is from Marin D. Question for Lady C. Have you had much interaction with Robert Lacey, and why do you think he is so anti-William? Beneath the veneer of a supposedly neutral stance, it is clear that he is biased against William. In his book, he even blames William for Harry wearing the Nazi costume. He claims that William coaxed Harry into his self-destructive ways. Why do you think he dislikes William so much?
I think the short answer is that basically Robert Lacey is a bright, boy who came from a relatively humble background, not overly humble, but not grand. He was ambitious. He has climbed and worked his way up. But he has a chip on his shoulder. There's no two ways about it. He's chippy. He's got a real chip on his shoulder. And ironically, now that he's made the grand aristocratic marriage and married Jane Rain, his chippiness is coming out in a way it never came out when he was still on the way up. But now that he has arrived, so have all his chips. I think it's as simple as that. I think he suffers, as do many people with chips on their shoulders, from various complexes. And he looks around and he doesn't see things as they are. He sees things through the prism of his prejudices. And I also think he's very heavily influenced by the Annabel Goldsmith camp, because Annabel Goldsmith is his sister-in-law. And I think I've mentioned this before, that she was very pro-Diana and very anti-Charles. But Robert Lacey has made the point that he is not pro the royal family, which I find surprising since he spent his whole life writing about royalty. And since he had a choice, he could have written about something else. He says he's a historian. Why not write about Cicero, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, medieval England, the Valois, the Bourbons of France, the Bourbons of Spain, the Bourbons of Italy. You know, I mean, why limit yourself to a family you don't like? I mean, gosh, I mean, is he, aside from being a chippy oik also, because he is a chippy oik, is he also, aside from being a chippy oik, a masochist? I mean, the answer lies somewhere between yes and yes, because otherwise why is he writing about people he doesn't like, except unless he's truly malicious, in which case it really would be too regrettable, and he's trying to do them down while making himself money. But he doesn't miss an opportunity in his book to hammer William unfairly. And to him, it's perfectly acceptable, because he has a chip on his shoulder, that Harry would have a second son complex. It wouldn't have occurred to him that Harry shouldn't have a second son complex. Harry shouldn't be bemoaning the fact that he's number 2 and will never inherit the throne. Harry should be thinking, wow, I should be really grateful. I'm number 2 of a very privileged institution. You see, that's where the complexes of somebody like Robert Lacey will enter the play. Because Robert Lacey will have been brought up in an England that was far more class stratified than it now is. And I mean, the mere fact that he's ended up where he's ended up and that he's had the career that he's had shows that England has not really prevented working class boys from making good in this country, or petty bourgeois boys from making good, that you don't have to have been born into a grand background to have achieved rather more than many well-born people have achieved. So let's be measured about this and point out that he has achieved a lot professionally. However, despite his achievements, he has this chippy attitude, this resentment, this rampant envy, this covetousness that if you're not number 1, you are being deprived of your rights. Well, I'm sorry. An army can't have only field marshals. It needs majors, it needs foot soldiers, it needs captains. And I just don't get why people like him are so envious and so denigratory of the fact that in this world there is no such thing as true equality. What we aim for is equality of opportunity, and what we aim for is opportunity itself. But to pretend that we all have to be equal, and if we are not all equal, that there is something wrong with society, shows there's something wrong with the person. Because you're taller than some people, other people are shorter, some are more intelligent, some are better looking. There's no such thing as true equality. Equality of opportunity is another thing altogether. Everybody should have an opportunity. And Robert Lacey's career and accomplishments actually show that his attitudes and his prejudices are actually an absolute denial of his right to possess them. He is a flaming example of somebody who started out down here, who has ended up here, and who has done it to a large extent of initiative, intelligence, and graft. And if he could have done it, Harry could have done it. The fact that William is number one doesn't mean that William is, or that William will be number one, doesn't mean that William is deserving of Robert Lacey's contempt and malice and envy. William didn't choose to be number one. William, however, has chosen to fulfill the role of number one in an exemplary manner. Harry has chosen to fulfill the role of number two in a dreadful, bizarre, envious, rapacious, greedy, niggardly, awful manner. I mean, when you stop to think that Harry was so popular a few years ago, and now he gets up on television and chats utter rubbish and accuses this country's people of having been racist because they didn't embrace the fact that he married a self-aggrandizing, greedy guts. It's unbelievable. But that feeds into Robert Lacey's prejudices, and he looks at Harry and says, "Oh, Harry, you're so wonderful. You're manfully trying to overcome the hurdles of being one of the most privileged people on earth because you're not the most privileged person on earth." There's something very sick about it all, I've got to tell you, don't you think?
I think that the guy can't blame William for what Harry does. They're only 2 years apart. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. They're only 2 years apart. So when he dressed up like a Nazi, William probably would have said, "It's not a good idea, bro."
Well,
And
even if he didn't say it's not a good idea, so what?
he would have said, "It's not probably a good idea." And Harry would have been like, "Well, I don't care. I do what I want." How's that William being a bad brother? William's not going to beat him up and rip off his clothes and say, "Don't go to the party," like that. He's going to be like, "Well, you know what? You're old enough, bro, to do what you want. Go and do it. And you'll see what happens."
Well, of
and
course,
Harry will be like, "Yeah, exactly. Leave me alone."
in the book, in his book, Robert Lacey tries to blame William for it.
I think it's ridiculous.
Harry made the choice.
Anyone to blame
and
on
William,
this would be the parents to allow the child to go out like that.
And William
Anyone.
William didn't stop him.
Well, William can't. He's his brother. He's not
That's
his
right.
parents, for goodness sakes.
And also, it's a petty thing to have chosen, but Robert Lacey never misses a point to hammer home.
Does this man have any siblings?
Who, Robert Lacey?
Yes.
I have no idea.
Well, clearly not, because I'm telling you, I don't know who has siblings, but I have a sibling, and you don't always listen to him.
Quite.
And probably actually never.
Quite.
Because you have your own opinions.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. So, well, I think it's very sad, but I think Robert Lacey is living proof that every one of his postures are based upon fallacies. and that every one of his positions with regard to the royal family are nonsensical. He, Robert Lacey, and his accomplishments are the living proof that he is the product of a society that allows people to move up in the world as long as they do it with their own initiative, because he has done it. And for him to be bleating about the fact that Harry, being number 2, should be allowed to have this massive, destructive, very dangerous second son complex just shows that Robert Lacey either is an idiot, which it's quite possible, for all his brightness, you can be a bright fool. So he's either an idiot, or then he's got a screw loose somewhere. I actually suspect he's not an idiot. I just think that his prejudices have blinded him to the realities of the fact that in life everybody has a cross to bear. Nobody is truly the equal of anybody else, and each person has their pluses and their minuses, and looking at it from the point of view of everybody should be equal is just the most naive, unproductive way to go about life. And then to decide, well, since somebody is number 1 and somebody else is number 2, we must always do down number 1 and boost up number 2, even when number 1 is being productive and positive and number 2 is being destructive and negative. And on that note, I think, honey, we should go on to the next question.
Right, so for our last question today is from Diane Koss. When you mentioned dark forces wanting to bring down the monarchy, it brought to mind Barbara Amiel's most recent book, Friends and Enemies, wherein she states Conrad was not a direct American political presence, no big Wales in Washington, D.C., but he was fun to bring down, a right-wing press baron with American newspapers whose point of view, especially in Chicago, was anathema. I believe there are dark forces in America media who are out to promote woke ideas and socialist causes and upset the melting pot, which America once was, and reimagine some sort of Saros News World Order hell. Since your name does not appear either her friends or enemies list in the back of her book, and being somewhat of a contemporary, would you care to comment on Comrade Black's 14 years legal odyssey and the destruction of his $2 billion Hollinger enterprise?
Well, that's a brilliant question, actually. Conrad Black, to those of you who don't know, is Lord Black of Crossharbour. He was a very successful Canadian businessman who was made an English peer when he bought the Telegraph group of companies, the newspapers, the Daily and Sunday Telegraph, and became a press baron. He was a very successful Canadian businessman. He was born into a very well-off Canadian family. So he was born effectively with a silver spoon, but he turned it into a golden spoon. He's actually something of a historian and has written 1 or 2 very good history books. He is very wordy. I will say that. He's very wordy. I've met Barbara Amiel through one of your godmothers, because they're both Canadian, and In those days, Barbara was married to David Graham, who was also a friend of Aunt Corrie's and a friend of Elaine's, etc. So, we have links going way, way back. But I don't really know her well. I've only met her. She's very attractive, very bright, very charming, but she was never my sort of person. She was too clearly very bright and on the make. And, I don't like that sort of person very much. I'd much rather be with people I like and find cozy. Having said that, she's extremely intelligent. And so is he. She became a very successful right-wing columnist in Canada and also in England. He was a very successful right-wing publisher here and in Canada, who then bought some American companies, and she made the fatal mistake, they both really did make the fatal mistake of enjoying their newfound success rather too much. And it's amazing how much covetousness success will engender, especially if people think you're enjoying it too much. Which, of course, is really, say, where Meghan is very clever, because at the very moment that she's sucking up all of the success and aiming for all of it, she's saying, oh, I suffer. Well, Barbara and Conrad Black didn't say they suffered. They said, oh, we're having the most wonderful time, and aren't we lucky, and we're just enjoying ourselves. Then she made the fatal error of being interviewed by, I think it was Vanity Fair, and she was showing them her cupboards. Can you imagine? She was showing them what's in her cupboards. I mean, I ask you. So, Arivist, showing them the contents of her cupboards with the Chanel bags and these shoes and Ferragamo, the whatever, and Chanel. I mean, honestly. And the interviewer commented on it, and she said, being droll, I don't think she was being serious. She said, oh, I have an extravagance that knows no bounds. That was written about, and that was the start of their destruction. They then got a lot of very negative publicity from people in his company who saw this was the ideal opportunity to try to bring him down. He had turned a relatively small set of companies into a $2 billion company. Hollinger in America and Canada, mostly Canada, but in America. A bit in America, but mostly in Canada. Members of his board, because if you're a great success, there are always people who want to supplant you. It's not enough that you give them the opportunity to succeed as well. They want to be you. It's a perfectly standard phenomenon. And he fell prey to this. And they tried to question some of the dealings that he had done. All perfectly correct, all perfectly above board. And they tried to question them, making out that he had awarded himself, I think it was something like $80 million worth of fees that were dishonest. Well, since he'd increased the value of the company by $2 billion, I don't think that $80 million worth of fees was disproportionate, and that some of them, when they sold companies, he and the directors who were involved in the companies were not allowed to compete for a certain length of time, which is fairly standard, and therefore they needed to be compensated for that. Again, fairly standard. But because neither he nor Barbara was an American and didn't understand the American way of doing things, and she admits it in her book. I read her book and I thought it was very long, but I enjoyed it. I mean, she leaves no stone unturned to plunge the knife into everybody who plunged the knife into her. And I get it, you know, because I think both she and he were very unfairly treated. But people like to see the mighty fall, you know, and the directors of the company, some of them tried to have a boardroom coup, accusing him of things, and that would have got him, hopefully they hoped, to have to step aside, and they would then step into his shoes. It so happens that he then went for an American device where you have a special committee. He had no idea that this was the absolutely worst thing that they could have done. She admits it in the book. It was a license for the American more than the Canadian, but the Canadians very quickly jumped on the bandwagon as well to make massive fees for themselves. The lawyers were all over everything, looking for wrongdoing when they couldn't find wrongdoing to justify their tens of millions, then hundreds of millions of dollars of fees. They had to create wrongdoing, and they literally just created it where it didn't exist. Ultimately, he went to prison. He sued for libel. He got the largest libel award ever granted to a Canadian against the man who was his chief nemesis, so to speak. But they had destroyed him financially. They destroyed the company. All the shareholders got not a penny out of the $2 billion. The money went on fees for the lawyers in America, then in Canada. A complete disgrace. Total disgrace. So I think his story is a very good cautionary tale, because he didn't know what he was doing when he got this special committee involved. He just assumed. You know, I'm always telling you children, never make assumptions unnecessarily
That's
in
more
life.
me telling you that.
Well, I'm always saying it.
I hate people that don't know the answer. Like, if you don't know the answer, don't say anything.
Oh, no, I'm saying false assumptions.
I'm saying the same thing. It's the same thing. If you don't know what to do, don't do it.
That's right.
Same thing.
That's right. Well, but he made a whole load of false assumptions. And, you know, you think you know what you're doing and you don't. You need to find out what you should be doing before you do it.
Definitely.
And don't make an assumption. Well,
completely, because then it's just going to go right down for you.
He did with him. Completely destroyed him. It destroyed her. It destroyed their companies.
Okay.
It destroyed their beautifully structured lives. And she's written this book, which I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed reading. She holds nothing back. She pulls no punches, whether it's against herself or anyone else. She is brutally honest. It's a very sad story. And yes, it shows that there are woke left-wing socialist forces at play in society. But I don't think those are what brought them down. I think what brought them down was the greed of his fellow directors who wanted to supplant him.
When they were already making money. And
Yes.
a lot of money.
Yes, but they wanted to make more money. I mean, the man is a financial genius. But you know, very often in life, if you're the genius and I'm on your coattails, I end up wanting everything you have and everything you are. And it's quite standard for people to delude themselves into thinking, oh, I'm as bright as Misha. He makes all of that money. I can make it too. Well, of course you can't.
No, because you didn't understand what he did to get it.
That's right. So, and that's it. So, so I don't think it's because, yes, there are woke, left-wing, socialist forces at play in this world. There are also right-wing, unenlightened, sleeping, whatever word you want to say, forces at play as well. Not as many, because we live in a world where much of the media are indeed woke or tending towards the woke orthodoxy, which is becoming quite illiberal and which is becoming quite restraining and which is actually becoming quite censorial. But there are nevertheless both camps always in society. And to an extent, a society needs to have the push and pull for it to progress. It never functions well without a degree of push and pull. There needs to be push and pull in society. But I don't think any of that brought them down. I think the press, the left-wing press, was especially happy to see them fall, but they would have fallen in any event, even without the support of the left-wing press, because they were in the hands and teeth of a greedy set of lawyers who were determined to milk the situation and tell any lie that would further their cause in terms of getting fees. And they got, as I say, they got fees to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So it was greed at play. And it's simple as that. And on that note, thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed this. Do keep the questions coming in.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you very much, and goodbye.